Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today, a joint partnership with the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network, JCOIN, and the National District Attorneys Association on prosecutor-led diversion, best practices for people with substance use disorders. We are so grateful to have you all today and to have this conversation with real leaders in both the research and prosecutor fields to discuss innovations in this space. Really grateful to the leadership of NDAA and Nelson Bunn and the work that we're doing together collaboratively with JCOIN. My name is Jessica Holsey with Addiction Policy Forum. We're a partner with the JCOIN network, and I'm so excited to see you all today. I'm going to do really brief introductions of our speakers, and then we'll get started with the content and then reserve Q&A for the end of our session. Today we have Nelson Bunn, Executive Director of the National District Attorneys Association, Jonathan Blodgett, District Attorney for Essex County, Massachusetts, Dave Aronberg, State's Attorney for the 15th Judicial Circuit in Florida, Mark Vargo, State's Attorney for Pennington County, South Dakota, and we have Dr. Tisha Wiley, Branch Chief and Associate Director for Justice Systems at the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, which is a division within NIH. I'm so excited to have everyone today for a really amazing conversation, digging into best practices and really some impressive and inspiring work that we're really anxious to hear more about. With that, I will pass it over to Nelson for welcome and intro.
Well, thank you, Jess, and thank you to the JCOIN and HEAL initiative here with NIH, which you'll hear a little bit more about shortly. And thanks to all of our other presenters today. On behalf of the National District Attorneys Association, we're so excited to partner with Jess and her team and others on the call in order to really highlight the importance of the role of the prosecutor in the criminal justice system, specifically today looking at prosecutor-led diversion programming when it comes to individuals suffering from substance use disorders. You will hear today some really innovative and neat work that's being done in the field. And I think this is a really great opportunity to see what prosecutors are doing to really advance a better justice system. And that means earlier interventions in the system, making sure that services are accessible for those that may be suffering from substance use disorders, mental health issues. And what I think you'll really hear is that prosecutors are instrumental in diversion programming as some of the earliest developers and innovators in the diversion space in order to make sure that we are holding the right people accountable. And for those that do need additional support services, to make sure that they have what they need to effectively live their lives, and make sure that we're addressing substance use disorders and addiction, treating it as a disease, which we know is the case. So thank you to everyone on the call for joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tisha Wiley with NIDA to learn a little bit more before we get to our great panel today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to start sharing my screen and I have a few slides to share with you, but I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk and learn with all of you today and share the work that we're doing at NIDA with the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network. And let me just make sure, are you able to see my slides? And you're seeing not the backstage, but the front stage view. So I'm just going to go through the slides. So I'm going to start just by sharing with you what we're doing within the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network and the work that we hope to accomplish. I'll say at the outset, we don't have as much work within the network yet that does focus on prosecutor-led diversion. That's something I hope that we can correct over time, but I think there are a lot of opportunities here. So I'm going to start just by sharing with you what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do business a little bit differently than we have before so that we can get the research out into the real world and able to help people as quickly as possible. And so one thing that we've started with JCOIN, it's an initiative that's funded through a broader initiative called the Helping End Addiction Long-Term Initiative. It was a congressional appropriation, and we had the opportunity to do some really ambitious work in the justice system. And as we've gone about that, we've started with this vision, and you see our vision statement here, which is the idea that every individual who's involved in the justice system who has a substance use disorder should have access to effective treatment, and that is true whether they're detained or they're in the community. We have 5 priority goals that we use to sort of move toward that vision. Because we are NIH, our top priority is about generating new evidence about what works, but also how to effectively implement those things that work. And one of the tools that we're using as we do that is working around developing a network of researchers who collaborate with practitioners across both justice and community-based settings. That's one reason that we're so excited to be able to engage in this partnership with NDAA and do this work with you, because it's about breaking out of our silos and working together. And as we do this work, we're building a lot, and we hope to ultimately become a go-to resource for both researchers and practitioners. We're hoping to build capacity to both conduct and apply research in justice settings. And ultimately, what we hope this will result in is making a faster translation of science to solutions and getting those feedback loops between the field and researchers. So these are those 5 goals just visualized for you. Here are a bunch of different activities that we have going on within the network. And I'm just going to break this down just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that we are doing. Really, the foundation of what we do within JCOIN are our research studies. We have 13 multi-site clinical trials. These are trials that are happening in at least 5 communities, each of them. And we've got a number of protocols. We just published all the protocols, or they're in progress. So we've got 7 published now. The remaining 6 will be published over the next few weeks. If you're interested, you can find that in the Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment. I've got a couple just of the articles that are out right now. And I encourage you, I'm not going to dive deep into the details of any of the studies, but if you're interested, you can find that. And if you can't access the articles, I'd be happy to provide them to you. And so while I'm not going to go deep, I do want to give you a sense of the kinds of research we're doing, so you'll know sort of the pipeline of research that JCOIN's hoping to create. One of the things that we are doing that we're really excited about, we have 2 studies that are looking at state policy rollouts. Those are really looking at what are the effects of comprehensive medications in jails and drug courts. And when I say comprehensive medication, I mean that there are 3 forms of medications that we know to be effective when it comes to treating opioid use disorder, and that's buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone. And so in jails in Massachusetts and in drug courts in New York, we're looking at programs that are intentionally offering all 3 forms of those medications. We have 7 other studies in several states that are looking at support linkage kinds of interventions, really to facilitate how people connect to services as they move between jails back into the community. And they're looking at different kinds of models like peer navigation or telehealth or other kinds of organizational connections. We've got 2 studies that are comparing head-to-head different formulations of different medications. So which medication works best for whom in these settings. They're looking at long-acting naltrexone versus long-acting buprenorphine. And then 2 studies are really looking at organizational implementation. So the way in which that you might approach how to implement evidence-based practices within the organizations. Across all of these studies, we've got 78 jails, 29 community supervision agencies, 10 drug courts, and 8 juvenile justice agencies. And as I said, we don't have a representation of prosecutor-led diversion programs here, but perhaps there are ways that we could add some of that kind of work in. I think that's an important missing piece in our overall portfolio. And I just want to give you a sense of the geographic coverage. We really do want to make this a national initiative, so that it could be a national resource. So across all of these different studies, we've got 117 counties across 27 states. We expect to enroll more than 9,000 people and more than 2,000 agency staff. And we'll be collecting administrative data from over 30,000 justice-involved people across all of these studies. So that's sort of the base of all the things we're doing, but we've got a lot of other research going on. And one of the other big things that we're trying to do is really understand the context that all of these clinical trials are taking place in. So we have 9 modeling projects. The goal of those modeling projects is to ask what if kinds of questions to go beyond the data that we can collect, and ask more hypothetical kinds of questions based on other kinds of existing data. We're also doing several policy and community scans because we want to understand how local and national policies are changing over time, what kinds of trends are happening in communities that might change how we interpret our findings, and also to understand how the funding climate changes over time. We have 11 surveys. Those surveys are looking at how local practices and community attitudes change over time. And some of those surveys are actually getting close to having results. So we do hope to start having results to share with folks very soon, including we did some surveys of community attitudes in the context of COVID at several junctures during 2020. And we do a lot too, just to make sure that across all of these different research teams that they're working together, that they're sharing measures, and that they have kind of a common foundation that they're working from. And we were able to also fund, obviously, the intersection of opioids and COVID and justice settings is a really important topic. We did fund 3 additional studies that are looking at different aspects of that will, I think, help us understand both testing and vaccination and with justice populations. And I think maybe relevant to this particular group, something I do want you to be aware of is we also know that NIH funding can be difficult for folks to approach if they've never had experience. So we built out a rapid small grant program. And the idea of that program is that it would be more nimble and able to capture things that are changing in the field. This is operated by our Coordination and Translation Center. And I want to highlight one key resource. JCOIN-CTC.org is our web portal. You do have to register. It's very simple, but if you put in your name and your email address, you can register to be a partner on our site. And once you do that, you can have access to all this information. If you have a program you're running or ideas that you'd really like to test out and would like some support to test those ideas, we do have this Rapid Innovation Grant Program that you can apply for. There are applications. Our next deadline is coming up very soon. It's February 2nd, but we expect to put these calls out 3 times a year. So if that's too soon for you to put something together and you are interested in that, there will be another call probably May or June. And so we have lots of resources and these are meant to be awarded within 3 to 4 months. We just went through our first experience of making those awards. So we're working out all the kinks. But it does not go through the typical NIH review process, which can be quite cumbersome. Instead, it's reviewed by partners and researchers within JCOIN. So we have several, a nice chunk of funds set aside to support those kinds of innovation grants. One thing that I think I want to emphasize about JCOIN and how we approach our work, it is about these collaborative relationships. So in all of the studies that we fund, it is driven and supported by local partnerships in every single community between the researchers and justice and behavioral health partners within those communities. And then at the higher level, we have a steering committee for the network as a whole. And we have actually we have more representatives from our partners, our justice and behavioral health partners, who help us set the overall course. And that's to make sure that we are being responsive to what is happening in the field. And partnerships are a big part of what we're doing. We have a practitioner board, which DA Blodgett is part of, and we have a stakeholder board of groups that we try to disseminate our information out to. We've built out relationships with our federal partners, and we've even, with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, they've partnered with us in supporting JCOIN and have given us $5 million to extend our activities. So we really want to make sure that we're breaking out of our silo and we're really reaching out to other complementary efforts. And while we're doing that, we also want to focus on building the field and increasing capacity within communities, increasing capacity of researchers. So when researchers are reaching out to partner, that they are sensitive to the kinds of issues that are important in the field, and that they're that they don't make novice mistakes. They don't do helicopter research, come in, take data and disappear. So it's all about building connections. We have a couple things that will be coming soon. One is a researcher practitioner matching platform. So if you've ever wondered, is there a researcher that I could partner with? Once we get this stood up, you'll be able to put in some search terms and find that person. We're also building out a really robust set of online training resources so you can get access to lots of content. A couple things though I want to highlight. We have an on-demand technical assistance function as well as a LEAP training program, and just say a couple words about each of those. Our LEAP training program stands for Learning Experiences to Advance Practice. We recruited our first cohort last year. There were 20 folks. About 15 of them were in our Scholar track, which is a one-year track. Gives those folks access to lots of learning opportunities. There's monthly webinars, just learning about research and how to apply research. A smaller group, 5 folks, were part of our investigator track. That's really for people that are interested in becoming NIH investigators and are on that path. It helps get them there. So we are now in the process of selecting our second cohort of trainees. We will reach out to recruit a third cohort of trainees this following winter. Again, all the information for that is on our website. I don't believe we had any prosecutors as participants or anyone working in prosecutors' offices, but we would certainly welcome that as part of our Scholar track. If anyone was interested, we'd be happy to talk to you about that. And then in terms of our on-demand technical assistance, this is supported by that BJA supplement. And it's really meant to break down the silos between the kind of work that the Bureau of Justice Assistance has typically done and what NIH has typically done. Here is tailored support and resources for anyone who's looking to do research and evaluation activities within justice settings. If you're a state or local justice agency, you can get help. Behavioral health agencies, researchers who are working in partnership with those agencies. Again, all of that is on our website. And again, if you go to that website, we are putting out resources. We're doing translation pieces on key articles that are written by our grantees. We're putting out toolkits. One of the toolkits we've published so far is a toolkit to help analyze geospatial data and give access to geospatial data. We will eventually, all the data from our studies will live in a data commons that others can use. So lots of things that we hope to share. So I'm going to quit talking right now. I hope that gave you a sense, but those are the activities we are doing through the JCOIN initiative, all in service of that vision. And we're just really excited for this opportunity to partner with you and share this information with you about all the things that we are doing. So I will stop there. And thank you again for the opportunity to share this.
Thank you, Dr. Wiley. I think next up on our speaker panel, we have District Attorney Jonathan Blodgett, who's done some really amazing work with adult and juvenile offender diversion programs in Essex, Massachusetts. So DA Blodgett, thanks for being here today. I think you're on mute. No, there's an obligatory Zoom snag that we have to get through on every one of these. So bear with us when we try to unmute DA Blodgett.
Here we go. I think it's okay. Thank you. Sorry about that glitch. Thank you, Jess and Dr. Wiley, and I'm pleased to be on this panel with some very committed and distinguished colleagues of mine. The drug diversion program that I started in my county, in Essex County, Massachusetts, is something that I'm probably the most proud of in terms of what I've done as district attorney. I have a district of 800,000 people, 34 cities and towns, and when I became district attorney, I had a juvenile justice program, juvenile diversion. I created a youthful diversion, and then in 2007, I set up a drug diversion component of my office, a drug diversion unit. It was really born from some discussion in my office about what we could do to help people suffering from substance use disorders, understanding, and you've all heard this cliche, that, and we all agree with it, that we could not arrest our way out of this problem. So we put our heads together, came up with what we thought was a practice, and we wanted to make it a best practice, and that was that people who are finding themselves in the criminal justice system in my county Provided they had not committed an act of violence, we would give them an opportunity to go through our drug diversion unit. And like anything that's new, you start with baby steps. I have 8 lower courts, 8 district courts, 3 juvenile courts, and 3 superior courts. So we started in 2 of our 8 district courts. And at the time when we set this up in 2007, it was going to be for people between 18 and 25, people who had insurance. And over time and quickly, what ended up happening is we have no age restriction. Our target audience at that point in time, when I first created this unit with my staff, were single moms who were struggling and committed some offenses. Again, as long as it didn't involve an act of violence. I'm pleased to say that I have it in all my courts now. The juvenile district and superior courts, there's no age restriction. A couple of years ago, I had a 70-year-old physician who went through our drug diversion unit. And the thing that's important about this is that prosecutors like Dave and Mark and myself, we understand that you have to do things differently in today's world, in today's age. So when I created this, I have a team of lawyers. I have 85 attorneys in my office. It wasn't really for us to develop the plan or to make sure that what we did would be successful without the help of healthcare professionals. So in my case, there's an organization called Bridgewell up here in Massachusetts that provides the necessary services and treatment program for those people who avail themselves of our drug diversion program. And that can be anything. They make the determination. They're the clinicians, we're the attorneys. I'd like to think that our mantra in this whole thing is, we call it compassion with accountability. So if you enter into our program, the clinicians take over. We sort of monitor it in the sense that if someone just walks out or doesn't complete it, they find themselves back into the system. But I'm proud to say that most people who enter it see it through to the end. Now, as you all know, people who are suffering from the disease of substance disorders often have many falls. We have left it up to our clinicians that if someone falls and the program can be rebooted, we let them stay in the program. It's a minimum of 6 months, and everybody I've ever talked to in this field says 6 months is the minimum you need for someone to get the help. But I've had people in the program, I've had one person in it for 2 years, I've had more than one for over a year, and I'm proud to say that over 1,000 people in my county have gone through this program and successfully completed it. And that means that they've gone through this in lieu of prosecution. I think the most important part for me, the biggest point is, this program's evolved over time. As I mentioned earlier, I've expanded it to all my courts. There's no age eligibility. When the clinicians tell us that they are, the people through it, have gone through it, have successfully completed it, then they're done. But I've also now had it in pre-complaint. So before you would be arraigned on a charge, we'd offer you diversion as an alternative. Now we do it pre-complaint, so that, and I've had great success and partnerships with the police chiefs. I have 34 police chiefs. They're all on board. They've been great about it. And it's something that I look to as keeping people out of the criminal justice system, but more importantly, getting them the help that they need. One point I should make as well, that if people had insurance, that was fine. If they didn't have insurance, it was not a negative factor. We still would take you in the program, and you would get the services that you would need, and hopefully avail yourselves of. And we also have aftercare. So we help people as best we can for housing, vocation, and aftercare with their clinicians. So everything's evolving. It still evolves, but it's something that is the bedrock of my office in terms of offering the community an alternative to incarceration for their disease of substance use disorder. That's my pitch.
Thank you so much, DA Blodgett. Such an impressive program with so many people that have been helped and benefited from it. Dave, can we turn to you for an update on the amazing work that you've done in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And it's great to follow my colleague, Jonathan Blodgett, who is the president formerly of the National District Attorney Association. And, you know, John talked about the need for diversion the need to have a compassionate approach. What happens though when the treatment provider has gone bad? What happens when you go down to Florida to get well and instead you end up in an ambulance or a body bag because the corruption in the drug treatment and sober home industries has led to outcomes that are not just negative, but life-threatening. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. I want to talk about the dark side of treatment, how well-intended federal laws have inadvertently created what's called the Florida Shuffle that creates a cycle of relapse instead of recovery. And since we are here to focus on prosecutorial diversions, I have a program that we have within the city of Delray Beach that is unique, that I'll end my presentation with, that's actually within the Delray Beach Police Department. It's a social worker within the police department itself. So to start, when it comes to drug treatment, you have the Florida model, which is very common around the country, but the model is someone who has substance use disorder will come down to Florida to get detox and inpatient treatment. 75% of our patients in private pay insurance down here in rehab come from out of state. So they come down here and insurance will pay for detox and inpatient, maybe about 5 days of detox, about 10 days of inpatient treatment, depending on your insurance. If you don't have insurance, Affordable Care Act will get you insurance through the exchanges. And under the Affordable Care Act, you don't have any more yearly or lifetime limits. So it's a very compassionate approach to make sure people have access to behavioral health care. And that's a good thing. And so after the insurance runs out on the inpatient care, you go to outpatient care. Go there for about a month. Where do you live when you're in outpatient care? You live at a sober home. A sober home is just a house. It's a private house. An owner just rents it out per week to like 9 unrelated people for 3 bedrooms. That's actually very common. 6 unrelated people in 2 or 3 bedrooms, very common. There's no insurance reimbursement in the sober home. There's no treatment in the sober home, in the typical sober home. It's just a house. And so insurance does not reimburse you for the sober home. Insurance reimburses for the outpatient care, and you pay out of pocket for the sober home. After the insurance runs out on outpatient care, then hopefully you're sober and you go home. This is the Florida model in theory. In practice, however, let's see. The easy part was putting the slide up. Now the hard part is getting to the next one. Thank you. All right. In practice, you have the Florida Shuffle, where you have patient brokering, illegal kickbacks, insurance fraud, and everyone's making money. It starts with a marketer sending you down to Florida with a free plane ticket. That in itself is a felony. You come down and you go to Heavenly Valley Recovery in Delray Beach. Mind you, there are no valleys in Florida, and where you're going is probably not heavenly. So you check into the rehab. The marketer gets a cut. That's illegal. You have insurance, so you get 5 days of detox, 10, 14 days of inpatient care, and then the marketer will steer you to an outpatient care center. Everyone is giving each other kickbacks. Everyone's making money off this. Even the sober home you live in is no longer charging you rent, or it's discounting the rent because the sober home is getting a kickback from the outpatient care center or the labs or the marketer itself. In fact, the only bubble on this chart that is not profitable is sobriety. It's hard enough to remain sober as it is, let alone knowing your sobriety will cost you your free housing in your sober home, your gifts they give you to stay there, whether it's a free pack of cigarettes or a scooter to get around. And now you got to move back to a snowy climate, live with your parents and find a job. Or you can test dirty again and the cycle begins anew. And that cycle, as I mentioned, under the Affordable Care Act, goes on and on forever until you leave in that ambulance or body bag. So go to the next slide. Oh, that's not the right slide. Let's go to the next one. Okay. That was a cool video, but it doesn't really pertain. That's the wrong video that got attached. Sorry, that was a technical error. Heads are going to roll for that. That would never happen in Jonathan Blodgett's office, I assure you. Okay. Oh, can we get back to my slide? I see Jessica on the screen. My slide presentation went off. Okay, there we go. There we go. Thank you. That's the one. All right. So we started a sober homes task force we're the first of its kind, to go after the fraud and abuse in the drug treatment industry, to go after the patient brokering. We discovered that our laws were very weak. And so we had to change the laws. We developed this task force through a one-time grant from the state government of $275,000. Then we assigned a full-time prosecutor. We got buy-in from all law enforcement agencies around the county. We had a law enforcement side of the task force. We had 2 civilian work groups. There's a picture of it. In fact, the guy who runs the task force is on the call today, Al Johnson, Chief Assistant State Attorney. You see him in the upper right-hand corner of that picture. To the right of him, you'll see me. I'm staring at my cell phone there. You would think that next time we post a picture of the Sober Homes Task Force, I'm probably not going to be on the phone. But hey, it is what it is. All right, so we have these long meetings. We came up with all these tough laws that have now become the model for the rest of the country. We even issued a grand jury report that called out Google for its marketing practices, for selling ad space to the highest bidder, regardless of how quality or lack of quality the provider is. Google changed its policies. Now they vet all the providers through a third party. So the grand jury report had its impact. The civilian task force, we even brought in people from the industry who ratted out the bad players, who told us where the loopholes were. And so we were able to clean up the industry by changing the laws and then using those tough laws for better regulation and tougher enforcement, to put handcuffs on many of the rogue actors. And those rogue actors went down to the tune of, next slide, please, 113 arrests since November 2016 and 60 convictions. On the far right is Kenny Chapman. He was featured on American Greed. You know you're doing something wrong when they do an entire episode of American Greed about you. He was the Pablo Escobar of the sober home world. He's now serving 27.5 years in federal prison. If you lived in his sober homes and you were a woman, you got to live rent-free. That was the good news. The bad news is, to do that, you had to engage in human trafficking, sex trafficking, with sometimes 100 different partners in a day. At least that's what one woman testified at court. And if you tried to leave, the windows and the doors were sealed shut, and they had your IDs and all your personal information and credit cards and anything you needed. So that was going on an everyday basis here in South Florida, but our task force cleaned up the industry, thankfully. The next slide, please. And in addition to the task force, we have the side of our response to the opioid epidemic, which is the prevention side, the rehabilitation side. So we did the enforcement side, but also we worked with Delray Beach for the CARES program. This is unique because I don't know of another program in the country where it's based within the police department. The Delray Beach Police Department hired a service population advocate, someone with a master's in social work, to go out there and help people before they became a statistic, before they got arrested themselves. Go to the next slide, please. So it's based on the belief that addiction is not a crime. And you have early interventions that lower the overdose rates more effectively than arrests. We had a huge number of overdoses in 2015, 2016. So Delray Beach took this innovative approach, and kudos to them. Go to the next slide. So they had to select a service population advocate. The woman on the left on that picture is the actual advocate who works within the Delray Beach Police Department. That's Ariana Ciancio. She's amazing. And she's out there identifying the problem, and she works alongside with law enforcement. She gets the phone numbers of individuals, people who die and people who need help. And she wants to make sure that that Narcan, naloxone is available in the community so that you don't have to wait on an ambulance or a firefighter to come to bring someone back to life, giving out Narcan to the people in the communities, in the at-risk groups. It's tough though to develop trust because a lot of the people she talks to are fearful, mistrustful of police. But she doesn't come in a police uniform, even though police pay her salary. Go to the next one, please. So she works with law enforcement, as I mentioned, the fire rescue department, code enforcement, Delray Beach Drug Task Force, worked with people involved with the homeless support, whether it's Goodwill, the outreach team, Lord's Place, Caring Kitchen, mental health support, and addiction treatment support, the Drug Abuse Foundation. So she brings all these services to them on the streets. Go to the next slide, please. And officers get trained because the officers need to know how to treat someone rather than arrest someone. You know, the first instinct in law enforcement is often, hey, let's give that person an NTA, notice to appear, or make an arrest. But we had to shift the philosophy to treating first when people are struggling with addiction, mental illness, or homelessness. And we've really, the department has really gained a lot of trust amongst the homeless population, at-risk groups in Delray Beach. A lot of it is removing the stigma and identifying overdoses. You know, if you see someone sleeping on the streets, is that someone sleeping on the streets or is that someone who's overdosed from an opioid? And then of course, it's to train as many people as possible with naloxone. Next one, please. Thank you. And this is a way for you to help follow me on Twitter. You can get great tweets like this, and you also get to see my profile pic of Cookie, the Basset Hound of Justice. There she is with me. In the year 2018, we had a 41% drop in opioid overdose deaths here in Palm Beach County. That was probably the best in the country. And I think it's a result of our crackdown on the rogue treatment centers, the corruption in the drug treatment and sober home industries, but also the work in Delray Beach and other parts of the county on the prevention side. Now, unfortunately, in the last couple years, 2020 and the end of 2019, 2020, and it's the start of this year, it looks like there's been an uptick again because of the rise of fentanyl, and also lockdowns because of the pandemic have made social interaction harder, more isolation, and that has exacerbated the problem. So we had a great run in 2018, but 2019, 2020, and the start of this year are already starting to tick up again, and hopefully we can start reversing that trend. And I believe that's the last slide. So with that, I want to say thank you, and thank you to your team, Jessica, for working the slides there. I'd be happy to take questions when that's appropriate.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. We have one more panelist presentation, and then we're going to move on to Q&A and hold those for the end. But Mark Vargo, thank you for joining us today and your work as well. So if we can turn to you.
Thank you, Jessica. It is an honor to be here, and I think I represent something a little bit different. We are obviously a smaller community here in South Dakota. My county is a population of just over 100,000 people. I have 23 attorneys in my office, not the 80-some that John has, and I'm not sure how many Dave has that are privileged to work with him. But the bottom line is we're working in a slightly different area, but I think it's a lot like what any number of people are dealing with across the country. There are probably more counties our size than there are the ones that we're dealing with in Florida and Massachusetts. One of the other distinctions is that we are also a regional center. So for a smaller county, we're actually the regional hub for most of Western South Dakota and some portions of Eastern Wyoming and Montana, which means that we get traffic from truly rural counties. And that includes many Native American communities and Native American reservations. 3 of the poorest 10 counties in the United States of America are within Rapid City's kind of area of influence. And so we're dealing with a population that is principally in those counties Native American, and which are frequently among the poorest in the country. So we are dealing with a paucity of resources that I think would make some of my friends in Massachusetts and even in Florida, where they try not to raise taxes quite as often, make them blush. We stood up diversion in 2016. We started with young adult diversion. And to give you a frame of reference, we had started with, we had specialty courts, DUI court, drug courts along the Miami model that was begun in 1988 through the Miami-Dade County State's Attorney's Office, which began the first drug courts. But those drug courts are principally aimed at people at the very end of their criminal careers or the people that are just about to go to the penitentiary. And it was designed by Janet Reno. The idea was to get people out of that pipeline, to give them one last chance, so to speak. The point of our diversion program, I think very much similar to what DA Blodgett was talking about, was that we wanted people at the very beginnings of their criminal careers, their very beginning involvement. And so our young adult diversion was focused on first time or early offenders at the very least. We expanded that to adult diversion. So we went from 18 to 25. We started with just marijuana and petty theft. We expanded it to basically all nonviolent crimes, including felonies, and have moved on to adult diversion. And just this year began specifically what we refer to as drug diversion. But in the context of this group, you need to understand we already did diversion programming for all drugs other than methamphetamine and opiates. Unlike Florida and the East Coast, we do deal with methamphetamine. It is still South Dakota's drug of choice. And while we are feeling the impact of the heroin and opiate epidemic, we are still dealing with the throes of the methamphetamine epidemic simultaneously. People are using opiates to cure the fact that they can't get their meth on a given day. And so it's kind of exciting to have stood up a program at the very beginning of COVID. We hired our first full-time drug diversion coordinator. And so in an office that has 60 employees, I now have 6 people whose full-time job it is to get you out of the criminal justice system. 3 working on juvenile diversion programming and 3 working on adult diversion programming. We have had, despite the COVID situation, 437 people who at least were referred to the program for admission already in 2020 and into the beginning of 2021. Now, as you might suspect with methamphetamine addiction and with jails that we have reduced our jail population by a little over 25% in the last 3 years. A lot of those folks don't even make it through to their interviews. Some of them just disappear. Some of them go back to their addictions. But we, in, again, 1 year of people being referred through the program and a very challenging year at that, we have had 33% of the people that actually enrolled in the program who successfully completed the program requirements. That sounds pretty horrific, but it also means that everybody that's still in the program is counted as a failure. They're not counted as a success story. Of the people who have concluded the programs, 51% have actually gone through the program and successfully completed the requirements that we impose upon them. That may not sound great, but I hope that the people in this room understand what an absolute success that is. When we have people on probation, our failure rate and recidivism rate within a year is closer to the high 80s and low 90s, depending on which demographic you're dealing with. And so I am very proud of the fact that we've taken this head on. We are looking at a population that had been underserved, particularly in our Native American population. And one of the things that we have done that I think is has been particularly challenging, but that we have done very well at, is incorporating Native culture and Native healing practices into our drug diversion programming. 55%, by the way, of the folks that enter our drug diversion programming are Native American. And so the programming that we provide has to be culturally appropriate, particularly the aftercare, or you're just going to see people coming back on the carousel of addiction. And so we've had some outstanding partners that we have been able to work with. There's a group called 7 Directions that does in-jail counseling. It's an aftercare model, but it's actually essentially residential because they do it primarily in jail. They agreed to create an out-of-custody program for us, and we have been able to send a little over 100 people through their group with some very good results. And we are ready the moment that it actually opens up. We've got some folks here who work with the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who have created a 25-bed facility in Rapid City. Because of COVID, it has still not opened. We were supposed to have an opening ceremony on April 1st of 2020. It is still not open because of COVID concerns. But when that comes, we have become a financial supporter of that and partner with them. And they are reserving for us 12 beds, which will be residential, not inpatient, but residential treatment beds, aimed primarily at Native American women who are either pregnant or younger women who are of childbearing age, to try to get that 2-for-1 where you can save, if you can get mom out of her addiction, the chance of that child being system involved go down just dramatically. And so that'll be our primary focus, but those will all be diversion. Our diversion programs all work the same way. We bring somebody in, we do a screening interview, and we create a contract. The person acknowledges their behaviors so that if they are unsuccessful and we have to go back into the court system, we're not going to, this is not just kicking the can down the road one way or the other. And then we assign them out to the partners. Very much like what Dave was emphasizing, and I think this is very important. John talked about it as well. It is absolutely essential that we not second guess the treatment providers and the professionals. When I send somebody off into a treatment program, I do not try to get into the minutia of whether or not they have been successful. I let the program tell me that. I realize that at the far end of that, you might lead to the Florida shuffle. And if you have programs that you can't trust, I understand that. We have not faced that yet. There isn't quite the money in drug treatment programming in South Dakota that there is in Florida. Partially because while we do have valleys, we also have snow. So I think that that is a bulwark against the fraud that Dave has been fighting against. So what we have tried to do is to create programs that really meet people where they are. While we obviously make great use of treatment providers, all of our diversion programming, to include our drug diversion programming, also tries to address some of the underlying issues that led people into drug addiction in the first place. And so somebody who goes into drug diversion might be required to enter into the 7 Directions program, but they might also then be required to get their GED or to go through some form of job training or to become involved in cultural and community programming that has nothing directly to do with drugs, but gives you something else to do. And so I know that we only have a certain amount of time left. I don't want to take the rest of it. And as I said, we have some challenges, not the least of which is that we are among the reddest of red states. I like to tell people that we are the place where you make the transition between Minnesota and Wyoming, both politically and geographically. And I am on the western edge of this state, which means that it is just about as red as it gets. Finding tax dollars has been challenging, but between our diversion programming and our care campus, which is a single entry point where law enforcement, instead of booking somebody in jail, can drop them off at a facility where they have the option of a safe solutions, a sober bed, or a safe solutions bed, a detox facility, meth opiate beds, and long-term residential treatment, and crisis care or mental health treatment. The law enforcement officer drops them at the door, and they don't have to make the decision about which of those programs they should be dropping them at. The professionals inside make those decisions. And that has diverted over 50,000 people in the last 2 years who very likely otherwise would have ended up being booked at our jail, and has saved roughly $1.4 million. I wish I could tell you that my county commission has put that 1.4 million back into our diversion programming and other programming that we might be able to utilize in the criminal justice system. They have not, but I can't complain too much. As I said, we are now at 6 people in my office whose entire job it is to try to keep you out of jail. And so for, I think, a very conservative and very tax averse location, we've done an amazing job at trying to fund some of these things. And I'm hopeful that we can continue that as we prove by the research that JCOIN and others do, that it is much more cost efficient to treat someone than to incarcerate them and then treat them again and then incarcerate them again. et cetera, et cetera. So with that, again, thank you for the invitation. And if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer what I can.
Thank you so much, Mark. Such amazing programming you're providing and such an impact. We're going to open up to Q&A. We already have a few questions that have come in through the chat here, so please put any questions you have in for our panelists. First question is from Erica. I believe this is for District Attorney Blodgett, but I think that pertains to all three of our panelists to provide some feedback here. How do you track recidivism for those that complete the 6-month program?
I'll jump in first. With our aftercare, our clinicians let us know how people are doing, and the people who've gone through our program like to stay in touch with their counselors and their clinicians. We don't go, I don't know how far we can go, but again, with our aftercare is set up through Bridgewell to track the recidivism.
In South Dakota, we actually have a mechanism. We dismiss the criminal charges when the person successfully completes their contract, but their record can't be sealed and expunged by state statute until they have been 1 year after that. And so we use that 1 year. If they've not been rearrested, that is considered a success. And so that's a fairly simple mechanism of tracking recidivism. And I will say our drug diversion, we're way too early for that. We only stood it up in January of 2020. But in our young adult diversion, even after we now allow for a wide variety of felony cases, our diversion remains in the low 20s, or our recidivism rate remains in the low 20s, which I believe is outstanding compared to the similarly situated folks that don't go through diversion.
Dave or Al, any specifics on how you track recidivism with the programming end of what you provide in your county?
We have a drug court. They do track. I don't have the numbers present, but one of the things that we're trying to achieve in our county is to make sure that overdoses, not necessarily those who come through the drug court and the criminal system, but all overdoses to emergency rooms have a warm handoff. In most cases with MAT treatment, peer-to-peer, and we have a model called the Addiction Stabilization Unit that is a hospital model with a clinic attached, run by the health department. It's the trauma hospital model. So any overdose in the county ultimately will go to this model. And I think recidivism and success, which will decrease recidivism, is largely a product of being able to hang on to folks in a long-term, lower level of care, and the opioid use disorder, which has hit Florida. It's not the meth or cocaine, it's opioids. Since it's long-term, between drug court, our hospital system, trauma system, and the clinic with a warm handoff, I think our numbers our success numbers have increased. Which will
just got a text from my diversion coordinator who was a little upset with me. Our diversion numbers for 2020 were 16.3% recidivism, not low 20s. My deepest apologies, but I think it shows that in a fairly stressful year, they did amazing work.
And compared to, you said that there was an 80 to 90% recidivism rate among some of your probationers, was that it?
That's on the drug side. So that's on the folks that are dealing with methamphetamine and heroin. We don't have recidivism numbers for them yet, since we aren't a year away from the first person who successfully completed the program.
That's amazing. So we have a question for all of our panelists, I believe, from John. In my district, most defendants are represented by the public defenders. In trying to establish a program like this, I have faced much opposition because the defenders would rather the case be dismissed and be done with the client, given the lack of cooperation by defense. where everyone knows the defendant will face no jail time on drug cases, even if there's a conviction. How do I divert the case out of the system?
Let me jump in first. And I suspect that Dave and Mark will agree with me or have the same consensus. Our diversion program is voluntary. We can't force anybody to take diversion. We make it as palatable as possible. And that's why, in my case, I've extended it to pre-complaint to try to grab somebody in the beginning, as Mark had said, to give them the impetus to do this. But that's a very good question. And I've had parents who, really plead with me to try to put their child, or even young adult child, through diversion, but it's voluntary. And I have dealt with this, as my staff will tell you, and I have 2 staff members on this call, that sometimes it's what's portrayed to defendants is that I can get this case dismissed with a fine today at arraignment or shortly. And look, diversion's hard work. Diversion is hard work. And when you put it in the hands of the clinicians, as the 3 of us have done, the only minimum in my program is 6 months. But as I said earlier, I've had people in the program for a year and some people, or one person for 2 years. So sometimes, and look, I've never, and I think everybody in this call would agree with me. I know Dr. Wiley, I know that Jessica would. Most people that we try to help don't want to get help. They don't want to give up their behavior at that time. And we work hard to try to help people modify their behavior and get better. So it's a problem, but none of us can force diversion on someone who's in the criminal justice system.
But it's also a moment in time, John. I think that sometimes when people get deeper into the system and they get a little more familiar with what's going to happen to them and that not much is going to happen to them, we do face some of that resistance to diversion. We try to make these offers at initial appearance, or at least advise the defendants that they're available at initial appearance. Sometimes that's a moment in time. There are people out there who are tired of this lifestyle and they haven't been able to kick it on their own, and they are looking for something to help them get through it. If we can grab them in that moment, that's a moment in time. But it's absolutely true. We had 437 people get referred to our drug diversion last year. I bet the number that actually entered the program was less than half of that, for exactly the reasons that the questioner was mentioning. So we don't have a panacea here, but I think it is a moment in time. And I think that there are people, if you get them at that right moment while they're still in jail, they're making their initial appearance. If they get started down the road and they can see something at the other end and start to talk to people, our system involved partners that work with us and our native organizations that work with us, they can really talk to them about why they should want to keep with this. That's what we're shooting for.
You're 100% right. And if I can jump in before Dave does, because Dave's on the board, the National Board of Drug Court Professionals, there's a distinction. When we try to get people into diversion, we tell them if they successfully complete it, the criminal case is dismissed. Oftentimes in drug court, which we all support drug court, I'm sure, without reservation, I've been at drug court graduations where the class speaker has said, I didn't want to do this, but I finally realized that drug court was the last house on the left, which has always impressed me in that regard. So there's a little bit of there's a distinction between your drug court and drug court graduations and diversion. And that's why those of us who do diversion as prosecutors, I really believe so much in it. But yeah, I mean, you want to get them the front end, and with that, I'll let David jump in.
I agree with everything that Mark and John said. I liken it to human trafficking when we try to help victims of human trafficking. And sometimes you see them as defendants and we want them to speak up, and the public defender is like, no, you're not talking to our client. We don't trust you. And so that's really the basis of it. There's a mistrust between the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office. And the worse that it gets, the more that they will counsel their clients. No, you don't trust that diversion program or the deals, or even talk to them. Just take your lumps, plead guilty, time served, go back on the streets, get to go home today. And I think part of it is just to have better communication, to let them know, no, we're actually on this one, we're on the same page. We want to get the person well. If you just want him to be back on the streets and you don't care what happens to him, then we can't help. But if you're with us and we want to get him well, then let's work something out here. And I think that message has to get across, but breaking through that mistrust between the two sides is really imperative in the drug court context and the human trafficking context.
And for us, it was building on our previous successes, Dave. We started with young adult diversion programming where there is a huge incentive. The difference between having a marijuana conviction, simple misdemeanor, slap on the wrist, $150 fine that you never pay, you plead guilty, you can't get public housing. 90% of the housing on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is public housing. You can't get a public job, and you can't get a student loan. So you have basically no options left at that point. We started with those programs, and our defense bar, our judges, and even to a certain extent our community and our system involved people saw what we were doing with young adult diversion. I think that gave us some credibility when we came to drug diversion.
Thank you. It's very helpful feedback for our question. So we have another one from Beth. Is the drug diversion program pre or post charge?
I assume that's for me, and ours is post-charge. Ours come in by arrest. It's pre-conviction, unlike specialty court, drug court, which for us is a post-conviction. It's essentially a probationary model. Again, it goes back to the original Miami model, but ours is post-charge. To the moment, all of our diversion programs are post-charge. We have looked at various times of trying to get them in pre-charge. I guess there have been a few instances where we get, for instance, a warrant request from law enforcement. So before we actually file charges, we might, but about 90% of our folks come to us post-arrest. And so our diversion programs are set up for post-charge.
I do both. I started my program post-charge or post-arraignment, as we say up here. And then as time went on, and as I mentioned earlier, we would try to evolve our program to make it better and more accessible to people who need help. We do pre-complaint as well. If the facts are good and we think we can really, hate to use the word seduce, but really convince the person who's been charged that we will give them an opportunity not to even step a foot in the courtroom and have the complaint dismissed if they successfully complete diversion. We have been doing it, we have been doing pre-complaint as well.
That's great, thank you.
Ours is done at arraignment, so it's post-charge, but that's when it all goes down at arraignment.
Thanks, Dave. I have another question for our panelists. Are your programs funded by grants, taxpayer dollars, or do the justice-involved individuals pay fees?
I'll start that one if I could. One of our bedrock principles is that our offenders pay nothing. This will never be a pay-to-play program. That makes it just rich white kids getting out of jail. And so that has been something that we harped on from the very beginning. The only money that an offender ever has to contribute to any of our diversion programming is restitution, because that's not my money, that's my victim's money, and I can't forgive that. Although I will tell you that I've had a lot of victims forego their restitution when they hear what we're putting somebody through for diversion. So we are very much in the, we don't want anyone to pay. Now, we have had grant money. We've been lucky that way. But for each of the people that I've hired under a grant, the next year they have moved to the county budget. So this is principally taxpayer funded at this point.
I've gotten a little bit of grant money from the Department of Public Health, certainly not much. And then anything above and beyond comes out of my regular budget and appropriation. And like Mark, we don't charge fee. We would never charge fees, and we don't. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have insurance, our clinicians company will take it. But if you don't, you're not disqualified from participating in our program.
And ours, most of the participants in our programs are indigent, so it would be public funds that pay for them. If a person with a private lawyer wants to get in, we don't discriminate against them. But they can get in and they would pay. We try not to look like it's cash register justice, and so but we don't want to discriminate against people who are private, who have private lawyers who have the resources and who want to get in. So it's a delicate balance, but the easiest answer is that an overwhelming number of our participants are indigent, so they do get public dollars.
Thank you. Susan asked if there are wraparound services, including job training and mental health services to assist with recovery.
That's part of our intake interview. My diversion staff does an extraordinary job of trying to identify the underlying problems and referring them out. We do not have a huge budget for those references. We do have some money that we are able to utilize, and I've gotten the commission to give us some money for that. But we absolutely send people into, say, GED or training programs. We've got community partners. As I said, I've got businesses that actually will not only take somebody in on their diversion program, but if they're successful, we'll actually hire them with a full wage, living wage job at the back end, which has been huge for some of our participants. And then we've had a lot of amazing partners in the community that have waived fees or provided opportunities for our young adults, and I assume now into our drug diversion, to get them into better situations at things that cost us virtually nothing. We do have some funds available to us, or available to our offenders, because of the trust responsibilities that the United States holds to the tribes. Some of our Native American offenders are able to go to programming that is paid for by the federal government and the Department of the Interior. A lot of our tribal treatment programs are at no cost to the person enrolling in them. So obviously we make use of those where we can.
We absolutely have wraparound services. What had started back in 2007 as intakes that were fairly straightforward. Now, I would say about at least 80% of the people that we offer diversion to have co-occurring mental health disorders. And obviously we make sure that we get them the mental health treatment as best we can. So absolutely, I mean, and we see that again with people who are suffering from substance use disorders. And an interesting sideline to that is I came to realize how much family members were affected by this. So I've got a passion now for childhood trauma, particularly undiagnosed childhood trauma, as both Jess and Nelson know. I talked about to both of them a lot about this. So that's the challenge, providing more when people are done with our program. But big concern, and it just is so apparent, is that so many people who we offer services to and so many people we do our intakes with have a co-occurring mental health disorder.
The same, you do see the co-occurring mental health disorders in drug court. We do have wraparound services, but where the wraparound services are better are in our veterans court. It's a different treatment court because we get a grant from the Veterans Administration. Federal money comes in and helps us. So they have more resources. If our regular drug court has wraparound services, but I would say the better services are through the VA if you're a veteran. So it's just a reality because it's where the dollars come from.
Very helpful. We have a question from Brian. Does your state have specific statutes that provide for prosecutorial diversion?
No.
Nor do we.
It's been going on for so long that every prosecutor's office does it. I don't know of any specific statute, but I don't know of any office that doesn't have these diversion programs either.
We do on the juvenile side, but we do not on the adult side.
And a question from Lee for DA Blodgett. Does pre-filing candidates waive speedy trial? And if so, is there a requirement for access to counsel for them on that decision?
I'm sorry, Jess. I didn't hear the first part of that.
It just went away. Hold on a second. Sorry.
Do they waive speedy trial, John?
Yeah.
No, I mean, we don't require that. We have had more than a few situations where we've offered diversion and it was declined by counsel. And then after a whole bunch of motions to suppress, motions to dismiss, and then they go, okay, now we'd like diversion. And, obviously we'd never deny that, but if that client had gotten diversion in the beginning, they would have already had 6 months to 12 months of treatment. So, I'm being very diplomatic in my response.
And a question from Kelly. Does your diversion staff use risk and needs assessment during the intake process? If so, which ones?
We do not use any routinely or specifically. We do have the Arnold assessment that we use in the criminal justice system. So that's part of the file. So they would have access to that, but they themselves do not administer any.
We don't have the luxury, frankly, of doing that. And I understand the question, but you have to understand that on a Monday morning, when a busy court, when you've got the clerk yelling for, to get people into the court, and we're trying to convince people to take diversion as an alternative, we're just hoping they'll say yes, so we can tell the clerk they're not on the list, or take them off the list and then get them in for the intake. So in terms of risk assessment, that's not, I just don't have the staff to do that, and we don't really have the time when, again, someone has been arrested over the weekend for a drug offense, and we're trying to convince them that diversion would be a better alternative than going inside the courtroom and being arraigned.
That's the same as John.
I imagine your behavioral health partners and providers use behavioral health assessments and other tools on the treatment side of it. So that's helpful. I don't see any other questions that have come in through our chat. We might be able to give people a few minutes back on a Friday afternoon. And I'm so grateful to all of our participants for staying with us and joining us this afternoon for the really great questions, and obviously lots of interest potentially on replicating some of these really amazing models in other jurisdictions. I was wondering if we could sort of go through our panel, all of our panelists, and maybe sort of have parting thoughts or items that are at the forefront of your mind after sort of going through the content today. Nelson?
Sure. I think from my perspective, hearing from prosecutors all around the country, I think Dave's point back to the question about statutory requirements, to me, hits home a very important point for everyone, that prosecutors have been doing diversion programming for so long and helped create them and implement them and innovate, that the story I always give is I had a reporter inquiry that asked me, what do prosecutors think about the shift to diversion? And I said, well, I'm sorry, I've got to stop you. I think your premise is just incorrect, because prosecutors have been doing diversion programs for a long, long time. I think even when I've talked to folks in John's office, for example, I think 1982 was like the first year for one of your programs. I mean, we're talking decades ago. So I think that's a salient point to hit home, that this is something that prosecutors have led on from the beginning and will continue to lead on.
Thank you, Nelson. Tisha?
This was just really incredible for me to hear about all the great work that each of you are doing. And I would invite you to think about JCOIN as a platform for partnering with researchers, generating evidence about the programs and how they work, and building out resources for others to replicate the great work that you're doing. So I just invite you to think about us as you build new programs, or as you want to take those programs that you've built and matured and think about generating scientific evidence about their effectiveness. Please think of us as partners. It's been such an incredible learning opportunity for me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to listen.
Thank you, Tisha.
Can I jump on something Nelson had said, because it's so true? I've had that experience myself, receiving calls from different news entities. In the year I served as president of NDAA, and wanted me to comment about the new progressive prosecutors, and they're going to do diversion. And I said, sometimes I was unable to suppress the chuckle, because I said, well, we've been doing that for a long time. And a lot of the national narrative now is, diversion programs are so popular, judges and other entities want to jump in on it, but it takes work, and you have to be committed to it. Good diversion programs evolve over time, and you have to pay attention to it. You have to have committed staff. I'm blessed with committed staff who does that. But most importantly, the biggest tool, the best tool that Mark and Dave and I have, and all the people who work with Nelson and for DAs, is prosecutorial discretion is the best tool in our toolkit. And we use it like a scalpel, not as a sledgehammer. And every DA who's elected and responsible to the people that he or she serves has the right to set up diversion programs the way he or she believes would best serve the community. So it's not cookie cut. It's not a one size fits all. using your brain. I mean, there's so many things that Mark does that, you know, really answer the call for his constituents, his community. The same with Dave in protecting people who are being scammed by some of these medical, so-called medical providers. So we need our discretion to do the programs that fit our respective counties and constituents. And we've been doing this for a long time. So this is nothing new.
Thank you, DA Blodgett. Mark?
Sure. John started with the you can't incarcerate your way out of this epidemic. But I think you also can't just ignore the epidemic and expect it to go away. And that's where I probably think that John's comments about a scalpel and not a sledgehammer are incredibly important. I don't think you can just decide that we're going to legalize drugs and make our communities safer and make our communities more healthy. The criminal justice system does have a role to play. But I also think that I'm getting gray here, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, but when I was a baby prosecutor and I was in Florida and it was warm, which it's not here right now, you hear the pain in my voice, we really only asked two questions: guilty or not guilty, and pen or no pen. And that was it. And I think that we are called upon 30 some years later to be much more precise with how are we going to make our communities safer and how are we going to change the behaviors that threaten our communities. And diversion is one of the most wonderful things because it puts it in the hands of the offender, it puts it in the hands of the community, and it takes us away from the mechanistic imposition of justice. So every single person that we send through diversion acknowledges that they did something wrong and could have had a criminal conviction. And we've decided that it is better for our community that they emerge without one. I love that approach. I disagree with the approach that we're just going to say, yeah, we're just not going to prosecute cases because we think that the consequences can be too harsh. So I think that the way that people like John, like the Florida model where it's, Dave says it's just so ubiquitous, that's something that's going to happen. And again, even here in very conservative law enforcement kind of South Dakota, I've got prosecutors all over the state making use of my diversion programming, sending people, using my people to create a contract and to put people through diversion when their offices are too small to have the personnel to do it. So I think it is the wave of the future. And I think that it is that prosecutorial discretion with an eye both on the offender and the community that makes it so wonderfully tailored to accomplish both behavioral modification and community and safety in a way that almost nothing else can.
Thank you, Mark. And Dave, last but not least.
Jessica, thank you for having us. By the way, Mark used to live in Florida. We always lose our best and brightest here in Florida to South Dakota. It's just a natural progression. The reason why he left, though, is because he didn't want to be labeled as a Florida man, as you understand why. But okay, we'd love to have you back one day, Mark. John and everyone, thank you. Nelson, the bottom line is this. I wanted to close with what my fellow prosecutors had said about that prosecutors were at the forefront of criminal justice reform before it became known as criminal justice reform. This is an example. These diversion programs, these treatment courts are examples of criminal justice reform. And it's important for people to realize that we're not just about getting convictions in every case. We're about doing justice, and there's a difference. But I just want to leave with one thing. In pushing back, you'll see some criticisms that, hey, these programs are not broad enough, and we're always looking to improve. But the criticism of our diversion program here from the public defender's office is that it should let in the drug dealers in addition to drug users and possessors. And as John is waving his head, hell no. And here's why. You don't want to put the fox in the hen house, right? I mean, you're not talking about, we're talking about drug court. You want to get people rehabilitated. You don't want to put businessmen and businesswomen inside the court where they have a whole ready supply of people with substance use disorder ready to buy from them. If you ever watch Breaking Bad, you remember that scene where Jesse and his cohorts were pretending that they were in recovery at the support group as a way to try to sell crystal meth to those in the support group. So you have to watch out for that as prosecutors, because if you don't watch out for that as prosecutors, no one else will. You got to make sure you protect the integrity of your programs. And one of the ways to protect it is to safeguard who gets in. And so when people say, hey, the more you let in, the merrier, well, up to a point. You want to make sure the right people are being let in to protect those who really do need the help in there. So that's the last thing I want to say, and just say thank you for the forum. I've really enjoyed it.
Dave, that's a whole different kind of Florida shuffle, but what Dave said, when you think about our human trafficking programs, exactly the same problem applies. You let people into those and into the safe houses. So it's again, we have to have two things in mind: community safety and behavior modification. And I think sometimes the defense and maybe a few of my colleagues around the country really only focus on being more lenient in every instance.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our panelists today and all of our participants. Just to reiterate a few of the items that Tisha flagged for you all during her presentation, I encourage all of you that are joining us, if you have diversion programs or different initiatives that you would like to have a research project around or partner with a research partner, the JRIG funding cycle is open now, due February 2nd, but there will be several other rounds that are coming this year. And having more data on prosecutor-led diversion helps us tell that story and give Tisha more data on this intercept point within the criminal justice system, which I feel is incredibly important to tell that story and make sure more people are aware of the options and the innovations that are here. Similarly, if you have staff or members of your team that do research or evaluation, if they're tracking outcomes and data, or they're interested in research, to apply to participate in our LEAP program. It's sort of the baby researcher program in many ways. And I think it would be amazing to have a few NDAA members or your staff participate in the LEAP program. Please sign up for updates at JCOIN-CTC.org. And we're really looking forward to an ongoing partnership with the National District Attorneys Association. Very grateful to Nelson for his leadership and all of the amazing members who do great work. And we'll follow up soon. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you.